The process of industrialization had started slowly. Initially, each small mill had undertaken one process, preparing woolen cloth, perhaps, or carding cotton and flax, that is, removing the grit from among the good cotton, grinding grain, sawing lumber. These early mills sprang up as early as the 18th century as towns grew prosperous enough to build them. When Samuel Slater's Pawtucket, Rhode Island spinning mill opened in 1790, it was the first to incorporate all necessary spinning machinery under a single factory roof. Slater's mill sparked a surge of similar establishments in the surrounding countryside. As in the early mills, labor came from the community. Mill owners took what was available. Early advertisements, for example, reveal little gender discrimination and perhaps even an emphasis on male children. "Wanted immediately," a New York cotton and linen manufactory advertised. A number of apprentices, either girls or boys, 12 years old and upwards. The sex of mill hands was less important than having a regular workforce. Gathered together under one roof, workers could be effectively supervised. But how would a workforce be assembled? Local farmers, men, were likely to return to the land on a seasonal basis. Landless women and their children could be relied on to stay, but they were not always the best workers. Widows, often poor and landless, proved to be the most desirable workers, especially if they had children of working age. The process was fueled by parallel changes in the household. As a relatively cheap and reliable labor force made up of women began to emerge, the new manufactures they produced contributed to changes in female labor at home. A generation earlier, the household had relied almost entirely on its own efforts to feed, clothe, and shelter the family. By 1800, it had begun to turn to factories for some of its essentials. In an uneven pattern, beginning in the settled northeastern areas about 1790, and extending west and south over the next 50 years, manufactured products, yard goods, candles, brooms, began to replace those formerly made in the household. The greatest change occurred in textile production. Before the Revolution, only the affluent had purchased yard goods. But as manufactured goods became less expensive, more and more women farmed out some part of the process. Some might spin and trade their excess yarn for woven fabric. Others sent out yarn to be dyed or cloth to be pressed. The final consolidation of the process occurred in 1814 in the mill that opened at Waltham, Massachusetts that year. In every family, this consolidation of manufacturing meant a new distribution of female energy. A woman who in 1790 could expect to produce all her own yarn and weave her own cloth found by 1830 that it was hardly worth her while to sit at a loom. In 1810, 2/3 of the fabric made in the United States still came from individual homes and small workshops, that is, mostly from the looms of individual women. After 1821, the home manufacture of fabric tumbled dramatically, and by 1855, it was pretty much gone. Women spent more time sewing and less producing cloth. At the same time, women stopped making items like candles, soap, and bread, which became cheap and widely available. The net result was not to reduce the housewife's labor, the result we might expect, but rather to minimize the need for extra female help. As the rural household carried less of the burden of production, the need for female labor, now you can imagine the labor of daughters, diminished. A single maid-of-all work increasingly defined a typical home. Wives in need of cash might take in boarders or seek given-out work. Unmarried daughters were left hanging. They supplemented family income by looking for work outside the home. These women like our Sabrina, made an ideal labor force. For manufacturers, their value was enhanced by their willingness to work for far less than boys or men. Compared to what they could earn elsewhere, the factory paid a good wage. But for factory owners, women's labor merely constituted the use of those who would be otherwise idle. Such labor, as Matthew Carey put it, was of little value and could be employed cheaply. So factory owners paid as high a wage as they needed to pay to attract women from their homes, but they paid a wage that would shrink as soon as they discovered that they could find women workers unencumbered by a domestic code. And now I need to ask you a question. Can we find here the root of women's unequal wages, a problem that we still have today?